14th.
Yeah. December 14th, this is Joe Todd, interview with Malcolm Ward. Mr. Ward, when were you born?
March 1st, 1912.
Where?
At Atoka.
Atoka?
Mm-hmm. We lived at Limestone Gap, so I was down there my mother was just down there just for me to be born. Was a doctor.
Was a doctor in Atoka?
There was doctors in Atoka at the time.
Okay, yeah. Who was your father?
Henry J. Ward. Henry Joseph Ward, I guess you could say.
Where was he from?
Where
was he from?
He lived down there. He had a Choctaw Nation allotment.
And who's your mother?
Her name was Mary Ellen Pigman, her maiden name.
How do you spell it last name?
Pigman.
And where's she from?
Well, actually, she was born in Alma, Arkansas, which is right east of Fort Smith. And came to Oklahoma when she was 3 weeks old. But they originated in eastern Kentucky, close to Asher, Kentucky, somewhere in that territory.
Yeah. When did your father come to Oklahoma? Was he born?
He was born in Oklahoma.
Did your grandfather come to Oklahoma?
Grandfather was born in Oklahoma, on that side of the family. Now my mother's father was born in Kentucky.
Mm-hmm. Okay, how far did your family go back in Oklahoma on your father's side?
My great grandfather came to Oklahoma apparently in 1841.
Who was he?
His name was Joseph Henry Ward. And it took a special act of the Choctaw legislature for him to stay in Oklahoma.
He was a non-Indian. What'd your great-grandfather do?
He came here as a teaching technician to teach the Indians hand skills, such as how to make cabinets and furniture and other things of that sort on a U.S. government contract. With him was 4 brothers and his mother. 2 brothers went back to New Jersey. One went to Weatherford, Texas, and the other 2 stayed in the Oklahoma Territory, or Choctaw Indian Nation, put it that way. Choctaw Indian Nation.
Did he settle around Atoka?
At Limestone Gap.
At Limestone Gap?
Mm-hmm. North of Limestone Gap.
So your family...
At one time he operated a relay station of horses for the stage line. I don't know whether it was the Butterfield or whether some other stage line.
So his main business was a teaching technician?
Teaching technician.
Mm-hmm.
But after he got a good-sized family, among other things, he raised livestock. Of course, they were running wild, the livestock was. And it was, the Texas Trail came right in front of his house. And immigrants moving into Texas and on west would quite often buy meat and salt, because his father-in-law operated a salt drying deal at the Bogey Depot, the salt springs at Bogey Depot. And this J. Gorman Kelly I was telling about did have one of the big pots left over from that. Great big rascal.
Okay, how long did he... Well, I guess he died in Limestone Gap then, didn't he?
Oh, yes.
How old was he when he died?
I think 52. He died of a heart attack in 1872, December of 1872. Just after the in-country railroad had come along, within 100 yards of his house.
Do you have any stories about him that you've been told?
Oh, yes. Various kinds, but you're wanting to know stories about the Wanette area, aren't you?
Well, no, about Oklahoma. Tell me some stories about your great-grandfather, what he did.
Well, I don't remember very many, but my grandfather told me. When this railroad came through, they had one crew whose main job was to cut out rocks for the bridge abutments. They went about a mile west of his house over in the top of a sandstone ridge over there and were cutting out rock for the bridge abutments. It was during the winter of 71 and 72. I guess you say early winter of 72, because one warm day in February, while they were eating dinner, a big old rattlesnake crawled out from among the rocks there someplace. And they jumped onto it, their crowbar, and said to beat off about a foot of its head. It still measured 6.5 feet long, and that is a big rattlesnake by anybody's measure. Even with the head gone. And one of the men on the crew was kind of a jack of all trades. He skinned that rattlesnake, took it back over to the house, stuffed it with bran out of the barn down there, hung it up in the barn. And pretty soon they moved on and left the snake hide there. Next summer, real hot summer day, and they had all the mud knocked out from between the logs of the house, what they call chinkins. All that mud knocked out so the wind would come through there, and a neighbor came from about 5 miles away, kind of a big windy storyteller, kind of like I am today. After dinner, he got out on his front porch, and he was reared back in the chair against the wall and telling some of his big tall stories. They had a tall, slim, sweetheart man who could not speak plain English. He sat and listened a little while and got up and sauntered through the house and out to the barn, come back in the back of the house with that rattlesnake and stepped across, but out from chickens across this man's lap. This man had his hands behind his head and was reared back, just telling the story, and all of a sudden he realized something was wrong down below, and he looked down there, and my grandfather said his jaw dropped down to about here. That shut off his tall stories. Also, a couple of times, bodies were found not too far away from the house of unknown people who had been coming through and been shot and left. They had to bury them. They didn't know who they were, no evidence on them or anything like that, and they just buried them. I've seen one of the graves is now under the edge of 69 Highway. Another man told me he saw it and he knew where it was, but he no longer owns the land.
So there are grave markers there then?
No grave markers. It was just a sunken place. You knew there was a grave there. No markers. Unless they put some rocks around, which I don't think they did.
Yeah. And where did your father teach? Did he teach in a school?
You mean my great-grandfather?
Your great-grandfather.
No, he didn't teach in school. But I don't know exactly what they had. He worked quite a bit down at Dokesville, the capital of the Choctaw Nation, around in that territory. Fort Townsend, really, I believe, was the center around there, and Dokesville close by. And when he got married, he married a part Indian woman at Dokesville. But then he moved back up there north of Limestone Gap. But during the Civil War, they went to Weatherford, Texas, where this other brother lived down there, and while there he laid out the town site of Springtown, Texas, the original town site. So he did have surveying knowledge. Now just exactly how much of it he had, I don't know, but he did lay out the town site. And they formed a sort of a home guard unit around there to protect themselves from Comanches farther west and what are called bushwhackers. And he was a captain in that.
This is in Weatherford?
At Weatherford, Texas. At the end of the Civil War, he caught part of the bunch that were driving off cattle. And I think possibly part of them were red, all right. Some of them were white. And I've been told that some of them were black. I'm supposed to hung 9 of them nearest cottonwood tree. By that time, the Northern troops were in charge of Texas, and they sort of frowned on hanging black people. So he had to take out hard to catch. I don't know whether it was somebody that was, whether it was the federal troops after him or whether it was some local person involved with that stealing that was kind of behind the scenes on the gang. Mm-hmm. Anyway, he came back to Oklahoma, and then later his family came back in. They came back in wagons back up there, and there must have been quite a bunch of them, because some people named Culberson told me that they came back in the same wagon train back to Atoka territory. I think Mrs. Culberson's picture, or her father's picture, was hanging there in the Historic Society downstairs in one of those, not in one of the middle floors there.
When did they return to Limestone Gap? What year?
1865.
Ever hear any stories of R.M. Jones?
No.
You know who he is, where he was?
No.
He was a Choctaw that brought about 500 slaves with him from
Mississippi.
Yeah.
No, I never heard of him. And I don't know that my great grandfather ever had any Negroes working for him, although there was some living not very far away. Mm-hmm. But my grandfather did have some sharecroppers who were black. And I do have one story there.
Okay. Now, who's your grandfather?
George Ward. I actually think the middle name was supposed to be Leviticus, but he didn't like it, so he always went by George Bell. Or J.L.
And he was born in Limestone Gap, your grandfather?
Yes.
Okay.
He was the youngest son. There was 5 boys born to Henry Joseph. Not Henry Joseph, Joseph Henry. But 5 boys born to Joseph Henry, and 6 girls, I think it was.
Now, when was your grandfather born? What year?
1861. But I'll take it back. He was not born at Limestone Gap. He actually was born at Weatherford, where this other brother lived, and the other brother was supposed to have been a doctor down there. Dr. William Ward.
Okay, and your grandfather was a farmer?
Yes.
Around
Well, not only a farmer, but he also was law enforcement. Because
Mm-hmm.
he worked the Choctaw Indian Police, as part of the Choctaw Indian Police. He worked as a deputy U.S. Marshal under Hanging Judge Parker. And he was the first elected sheriff of Atoka County after it became a state, after Oklahoma became a state. He also was an Indian politician. He was a senator in the last Choctaw legislature before statehood. I don't know how many others, but I know he was in the last one.
What was your grandfather like? Just describe him. What kind of man was he?
He was a person with quick movements, good businessman, and what you call reasonable in most other ways. Of course, he had his shortcomings and he had his good points. I can't really put a handle on that. Now, he died in Oklahoma City. And Myrtle Christian may have written some stories that he told her. But what she did with them, I don't know. Because she came out and talked to him several times. She was a niece. Myrtle Christian was his niece.
How big was his, did he have an allotment?
Yes, he had an allotment. How many acres, I don't know. My dad's allotment was 378 acres. The Choctaw, and I suppose the Chickasaw allotments, were on a dollar basis, $1,000 for $1 worth of land. You may have 300 acres right here. You might have $40 worth of the total allotment left over. It might be 40 miles away on some mountainside. It'd be 10 acres or 20 acres or maybe 30. And you probably never saw it. Somebody come along wanted to deed to it, you sold it to them. And Sugarloaf Mountain down there northeast of Photo, that's the way it's divided up. Dozens and dozens of tail end of those allotments over on Sugarloaf Mountain.
What was the average value of each allotment?
It was supposed to be $1,040 worth.
$1,004?
40. $1,040 worth was supposed to have been the value of each allotment, according to the appraisers for the Dawes Commission.
And how many allotments were there originally in the Choctaw Nation?
I don't have the least idea. My granddad and my dad and his brothers and sisters were all up in 11,000, so I don't know how many more there was. Because they did not go by, when they assigned numbers, they didn't go by alphabetically. They just.
What did your grandfather raise? What kind of crops?
He raised cotton and corn, cattle and hogs.
And he had some sharecroppers working for him?
Yes.
And they were black?
Some were black and some were white.
How many did he have working for him?
I don't have the least idea.
So you have some stories about them? About the sharecroppers?
I had one. J.L.'s youngest child, or wait a minute, it wasn't the youngest child, but it was the youngest child who lived, was a daughter. And his wife was teaching school a little over a mile away from home time, a subscription school. And they had a young woman, who was a hired girl, doing the housework. And every day at a certain time, she was to take the baby up to the school to be nursed, because they didn't have formulas back in those days. And she rides up there one day, and everybody's gone. She's supposed to go off on a picnic someplace or something. Goes back to the house, comes back up just after 1 o'clock. Still gone, the baby was just falling his head off. So on the way back, she stopped at one of the sharecroppers' house down there, a nigger sharecropper. She says, "Ma'am, what am I going to do with this baby? I can't find its mama." She held her hand up like this and said, "Give me that baby." Took care of that little problem right there. Which, if my aunt had ever known it, would have been quite mortifying to her.
What was her name? The daughter.
The daughter, that one was Hazel. There was an older daughter named Lucy, and then there was 3 others born there. One of them was Gladys, and she got hit in the back of the head while she was a small child by a flying loose swing in the yard, and the board here in the back of the head. And she died within a day or two from swelling to the brain, I suppose. And then there was a Mary and a Martha, who were twins. One of them lived 3 days, the other lived 21 days. They were born premature. And there was not facilities out there in that back country to take care of them.
And your father was Henry J. Ward.
Henry J. Ward.
And his allotment was 378 acres.
378 acres.
Was he a farmer?
He was a farmer.
He raised cotton and...
Cotton and corn. And we had alfalfa once in there. Raised cattle. And eventually turned into be more or less dairy cattle, and also raised poultry.
How many acres of cotton did you plant?
I wouldn't have the least idea. But it's more than I wanted to hoe out. I'll put it that way.
You chopped cotton then?
I chopped cotton.
How'd you chop cotton?
You take a hole and go after weeds in there. And you thin out the cotton where it's too thick, you thin it out to where it's
How far do you thin it out?
Oh, usually it was around 12, 14 inches, something like that.
How much cotton did you pick in a day?
I wasn't any good at picking cotton. I never picked but 100 pounds in a day, but once in my life. We quit it while I was in high school, so that I never really got into it. My hands were too slow. And I just was never able to pick. I'd starve to death picking cotton.
You ever go to the Allen home?
No, I've never been to the allotment home, but Charles LaFleur, what they call Captain Charles LaFleur, had an exact duplicate at Limestone Gap. The porches are all going off of it now, and the house is unoccupied, so it's not in very good shape. And it had a huge front door with a kind of an oval, long oval glass end of the door. Somebody stole it.
The house is still there?
House is still there. With a chimney, fireplace on each end, north end and south end. And the fireplaces work both in the lower floor and the second floor.
When was that house built?
I don't have the least idea when it was built, but it was built with lumber.
Was it after the Civil War?
Sometime after the Civil War. And Captain Charles LaFleur switched a franchise in some way with Joseph Henry Ward's father-in-law for toll bridges. Charles LaFleur had he had a franchise down there by Atoka across what we call North Bowie. Not North Bowie, but Muddy Bowie, Middle Bowie. And somewhere that he switched with Giles Thompson, who had the franchise at Limestone Gap. And took over the franchise up there. Because Giles Thompson lived down at Boggy Depot, and Charles LaFleur lived at Limestone Gap. And Charles LaFleur also was a deputy U.S. Marshal. In fact, he was supposed to have been in charge of the deputy U.S. Marshal for eastern Oklahoma under Judge Parker. And J.L. Ward and Charles LaFleur both were on the train when the Dalton boys robbed it right north of Pryor. And I expect you've read about that someplace in your history there.
Did they tell you about that?
Very little was ever mentioned about it, except that in the fight that followed, you had to lay on the ground. If you shot your pistol, you better roll over right quick and get out of the way, because it'd be return fire right to that spot.
When did that happen?
I don't have the least idea. Sometime after Kentucky Road came through, and Judge Parker didn't become judge over there until sometime in the 80s, I think.
Did grandfather have any stories about working for Judge Parker?
No, I never heard him tell one. If I'd been around him enough, he probably would have, but I was not around him enough for him to tell those stories.
What about Fort Towson or Dokesville? Any stories about that area?
No. Except the records show it that my great-grandfather was married there at Dokesville, and that he operated in the Fort Towson area when he first, probably in there when he first came to Oklahoma. See, now his mother and two brothers went back to New Jersey, where they came from. Apparently Pumpkin Plains, New Jersey. I don't have a record on it. But son William went on to Weatherford, Texas, and was known as a doctor down there. And Joseph and I can't remember the other man's name. Seemed like a Charles, but I'm not sure whether it was Charles or not. Charles or John. Charles, I think. They stayed there in Oklahoma.
Yeah.
This other that brother there that I can't remember the name, I'm sure is buried out southeast of Woodville on a farm down there. It belonged to the Chili's. Oh, it was Samuel, that's what it was. It wasn't John or Charles, it was Samuel. Sam Ward.
Okay, so is he the one that had the toll bridge franchise?
No, he didn't have a toll bridge franchise.
Okay.
and he was killed. Somebody shot him from on his front porch from out of the woods.
There's a Limestone Gap?
Northwest Limestone Gap. It's close to the Ward Building, West Limestone Gap.
What's Limestone Gap like? What kind of town was it to grow up in?
Actually, it was not a town. It was the post office and probably 2 grocery stores, or 1 grocery store there and another not too far away. JL had a grocery store once, a little over a mile from it. Right beside what's known as Limestone Gap Cemetery. It's been closed out a long time ago. Then there was another one there at Limestone Gap itself. They used to have a little depot there where people got on and off. And there was some pens up there where they loaded out cattle. And sometimes shipped oats. Now that was another crop that was raised by JL and by my father both. It was oats. And they sometimes would ship a cartload of oats to Kansas City. They'd kind of go together and get enough for a carload, divide the money. And all the cattle from there would go to Kansas City, that territory.
Have you heard of Joseph, Oklahoma?
It seemed like I've read the name, but that's all I...
Okay, he's a World War I soldier.
Oh yeah, I know.
Choctaw.
Choctaw. I didn't know him.
Okay. What kind of work do you do?
Right now I'm a farmer. Supposed to be retired, but I'm a farmer.
Is that what you've done most of your life?
No. When I finished Oklahoma A&M College, I went to work for the Soil Conservation Service. Only at that time it was known as Soil Erosion Service. Before they changed the name and got a high class with it.
When did you go to A&M?
I graduated there in 1935. I started school. I started college at Murray State College on Testimony in 1929. It took me 6 years to get my degree. I was out of school a year.
You went to high school in Atoka?
No, I went to high school. Started high school at Limestone Gap and moved to Kiowa. Finished high school at Kiowa. And Kiowa District now covers the Limestone Gap area.
So you went to elementary school there at Limestone Gap?
Most of it.
Okay.
I went 6 months to McAllister. And I got a picture a few days ago out of the Atoka paper, sometime this past summer or something, showing the kids at Chalky. I started school at Chalky, what they called the primer at that time, and now called kindergarten. And this picture was made during that year. And all the boys in the picture were small. I don't think any of them had passed the 3rd grade. We were all sitting on the front row. There's a bunch of big girls, middle-sized girls standing behind us and bigger girls behind that. There were no big boys.
What year was that?
1917.
How come there were no big boys?
They get big enough to work, they'd go to work. Schooling was all volunteer in those days. You get big enough to go to work, why you had enough schooling.
Who's your favorite teacher back then?
I don't remember that I had a favorite teacher. It was Miss Nanny Moore, who didn't teach at Chalky. She taught at Bethel, which was part of the Limestone Gap, when it became part of the Limestone Gap district. And she came from McAllister. And she taught me how to read with emphasis. That is, if you're reading a story that has a possum and a bear and something else, you change your voices to fit the characters. And the grandchildren enjoy it. To them, it's a great deal.
The Depression, 1930s.
1930s. Everybody was supporting, nobody claimed to be
How bad did it affect you and your family, the depression?
Well, it did and it did not. My dad had already lost his allotment to the mortgage company because he had enough Indian blood he could sell or mortgage or do what he wanted to. Indians with a certain amount of Indian blood had to have the approval of the BIA, which was extremely hard to get. He'd already lost allotment. When we moved from Limestone Gap to Cowboy, we were tenant farmers. And we were hit by what's called bang disease or brucellosis. Yeah. And had to sell the livestock we had. My dad went to work then for creameries, different creameries. He worked in Seminole. He worked in two other places, short time. Worked in Seminole 2 years, then he went to work in Oklahoma City at a creamery there. Then changed over to the Oklahoma Stock.
Okay.
When after World War II started, he was a pretty good carpenter, and he decided he could make more in the shipyards on the West Coast, and he went to the West Coast. But I can remember that butter sold for 10 cents a pound. Bacon sold for that, maybe less. You go into one of those stores up there with a $5 bill and come up 3 or 4 big sacks full of groceries. And when I was going to school at Stillwater, I had one class where I had to keep records of my personal expenditures just for the class, so I kept them. And my grocery bill was $7 a month, which is less than 25 cents per day. I had established a credit at a grocery store. I could go to the telephone, call in my order, and they would deliver it to my room.
Where'd you live?
There in Stillwater at the time.
You live off campus or on
Lived
campus?
off campus. It could be delivered to my room. We had like housekeeping rooms, which they cost us $7 a month. It cost us 25 cents a day for a room, a little less than 25 cents a day for a room, a little less than 25 cents for a meal.
What was the name of the store?
That particular store was Cersei's, where I established that credit. I had been buying, another fellow and I had been buying someplace else. I changed roommates. And we established credit at Cersei's. Cersei is long since dead. When I finished college up there, I owed Cersei $35. A huge debt. But it did amount to quite a bit in those days.
Yeah.
But I went to work at Soil Conservation Service, drawing $150 a month.
What'd you do?
Paid off right quick.
What'd you do for them?
Soil Conservation. I was what they call a technician at a CCC camp over at Conway.
What'd you do at CCC?
We worked on farms. We had those boys that had to work, and we had them doing conservation work on the farms within 20 miles of the camp area, as of the camp. And it was part of my job to help line up the work with the farmers to get them to let us come on to the farms and work.
Well, what kind of work would you do in the farm?
We would help them build terraces. We would plant Bermuda grass. We'd plant trees. We'd slope the gullies and plant them in Bermuda grass. And sometimes we would thin out a stand of trees that were too thick to give those that remained a better chance to grow. I got away from that though because the boss would put the boys out there on cold days to keep them busy and they would abuse the knowledge of how to do that. World War II came along, I was drafted into the Army Air Force. Spent 42 months in that.
What did you do in the Army Air Corps?
Crew chief, student and crew chief. Student first, and well, I became a mechanic and crew chief.
What kind of aircraft?
Training planes.
Oh, training. Okay.
On training planes. However, I ended up as an oxygen specialist at the gunner school at Fort Myers, Florida, and at Laredo, Texas, and went overseas for 10 months as a technician doing what we called in hydroponics, as growing vegetables with water and fertilizer.
And where'd you do that?
On Ascension Island, which is in the South Atlantic between South America and Africa. It's the only spot where they can land out there too. You run out of gasoline, didn't get there. You know, saying if you miss Ascension, your wife drew your pension. Or wife draws a pension, put it that way.
Mm-hmm.
When I came back, I went back to work for a little over a year for the Soil Conservation Service, and came to Conwell, back to Conwell, to teach veterans agriculture. Because I had a farm out here east of Wanette, I'm going to get back close to it. I had bought part of it before and during World War II. Bought some after I came here, after World War II. Accumulated close to 600 acres.
What do you raise now?
Cattle and hay.
Cattle.
As beef cattle and hay. I tell people I have a bunch of black females on welfare towards the black Angus. And they want their commodities every day.
Yep. Where'd you meet your wife?
At Conwell.
What's her name?
Her name was Lois Bell Collins. You spell it B-E-L-L-E.
And where's she from?
She was raised around the Stillwater area. Her mother taught school at a number of one-room schools around there. So raised. She actually finished high school at Yale. And she graduated in 1936, Oklahoma A&M College. I didn't meet her until sometime after she came to Conwell.
How many kids do you have?
We had two.
Two.
Mm-hmm.
How many grandkids?
Yes, have 5. We had a daughter and a son, and his son had a chemical imbalance when he was a student at OSU. Got to worrying about his grades and taking no-dose to stay awake. That caused chemical imbalance and threw him off mentally. Before we got him cured up, well, he deceased himself. And I know now what was the matter with him, but didn't know then. You learn about these things too late. After too late to help you.
That's right.
If I hadn't been giving him a fistful of vitamins and minerals like I take now, he'd have cured right up and been all right. But the daughter has 5 children. Mm-hmm. They live over here in Norman. And I was over there last Saturday and took 4 of them up to Crossroads Mall. Promptly got the youngest one lost, so I'm a good grandfather. He didn't see it that following his grandfather around was going to be any fun. I stationed myself and told him I'll be right here. He took off to play on the escalators, and then he got lost off that.
Okay, let me see.
If we had time enough, I could tell you lots more stories. But now here in this one area, some of these old timers have told me about things. For instance, it was Joe Shellman that did live here. And some of his descendants still do. He was a young boy, and out right northwest of town up here, there was huge native grass hay meadow. And he and his brother were raking the hay on that one hot summer day. There was a grove of trees on one part of it up there, and it was to get out there, and there were two fellows, or not two, but three. I don't know whether it's two or more. I really don't know. But there was some men behind the grove, keeping out of sight, kind of hid on the far side of the grove, keeping the horses hid. Kept watching down the section line road coming across to the south. And a posse came riding over from Lexington, going to Violet Springs over here on the county line. And what it developed was that these two fellows, two of them at least, were named Christian, called Christian brothers. And they had quite a little bit of reputation as outlaws in this country. And they had been in watermelon patch over there right south Lexington someplace, and the deputy U.S. Marshal rode up on them with arrest warrants. They had a little gun battle, and the deputy U.S. Marshal got shot and knocked off a piece of his liver. So they took out like they were going to Violet Springs. They hid up there. And as the posse rode by, they rode off down southwest down here. And Martin Sherman, Joe's father, was down there next day or something like that. It was raining. And these Christians were holed up in an empty house down here on Pond Creek. And they left out of there, and they supposedly were never heard from again. I don't know whether that was the last time they were seen or not, but they left this territory and were never heard of again. Now that might have been what run them out. And he had some other stories like that, one or two of which I remember, but I'd have to think a little while to get them straight. Gentleman's originally had land out north and west of Wanette over here, and then bought this land up here right northwest of town where there's still a big meadow and part of it, native grass meadow. In fact, the highway diagonals out northwest of, when you go back to Highway 39 and diagonals across a section there, and that used to be part of their land. They had two sections. They had that section and the section north of it.
Yeah. Do you have anything else about your great-grandfather, Joseph Ward?
Right offhand, I don't. Now, I told you he died with a heart attack, didn't I?
Yeah, in 1872. When was he born?
One record shows 1821, one shows 1822.
Where was he born?
New Jersey.
New Jersey?
Pompton Plains, New Jersey.
Who was his wife?
Her name was Elizabeth Thompson. I believe Lucy Elizabeth Thompson, I believe was her name, really. Thompson. She was Giles Thompson's daughter. One of his daughters. Now, I think she was 1/8 Choctaw. Giles Thompson was all white, but her mother was named Wall. Noah Wall was her grandfather. And Isaac Folsom, Nathaniel Folsom, was her great-great-grandfather. And Nathaniel Folsom was the first one that married into the Choctaw Nation as a 19-year-old. And he married two sisters in the same ceremony because he married under Choctaw laws, which allowed 3 wives. And one of the women had 15 kids, the other had 9. And you can find that big thick book on the Folsoms in the, I believe, downstairs in the library, down in the basement.
That's where I worked. Out of there.
Well, you'll find a big thick book on the Folsoms down there. And Nathaniel Folsom was his name. And Isaac Folsom was his father. And they had, according to Merle Creasman, they had started for the Choctaw country, met some of their friends or something coming back, and they tell them how bad the Choctaw Nation was over there. And Isaac decided to stay in Alabama. And he and Nathaniel had a fight. Nathaniel got on his horse and rode on over into Choctaw Nation. Married these two sisters in the same ceremony.
Yeah.
There was a man at Midwest City. It was the secretary of their Lions Club up there. He was one of the Folsom descendants. And he was much more Choctaw than I am.
Have you heard of Greenwood LaFleur?
Yes. He was Charles LaFleur's uncle.
Anything about him?
No, not particularly. Now, he did have two daughters living in Stigler. But I think they're both dead now. I'm sure they're both dead. And when the railroad came through, Greenwood LaFleur, wait a minute, yes, it was Greenwood LaFleur, I believe it was governor of the nation at that time. And the railroad was to pay so much, I believe $1. No, I don't remember it was $1. But it was $1 per carload of rock that was taken out to make ballast for the railroad. Mm-hmm. And Captain Charlie LaFleur was to collect that $1, which he got 20 cents out of every carload. And supposedly some of that money never got to the government of the Choctaw Nation. So there was quite a little scandal about it.
Whatever happened about that scandal?
I don't have the least idea whatever happened about it. I think that was one of the reasons that Greenwood LaFleur quit being governor. Yeah. He didn't run again because he knew that scandal was coming up. I better go.
Yeah, what's your